Hi everyone, it's Professor Reiko here. Today we're going to conclude our videos on the income statement by doing an income statement example. So this might be something that you see maybe in like on your homework assignments or on a test. Anytime you see something like that with a list of accounts and you notice if there says prepare a multiple step income statement assuming a 30% tax rate. All right, so anytime you see something like this, the first thing I always want to do is go through and make sure I'm know which accounts I'm going to use. All right. So for example, let's just start flipping through or going through each of these accounts. All right. So we're doing an income statement. So cash is not going to be on the income statement. It's on the balance sheet. All right. Sales revenue, that will be on the income statement. All right. Accounts receivable is an asset. It will not. Interest revenue will be. Equipment and land, both will not be included. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm just making my work a little bit easier because typically if you get this problem on a homework or on a test, your teacher or the textbook, they're just begging you to throw some of these assets or liabilities into your income statement at some point. So the key here is they're testing, do you know what goes into the income statement? What are those elements of the income statement that we covered in the first video on the income statement? All right, sales discounts, that's a contra revenue account that reduces revenue to get net sales or net revenue. So we'll include that. Cost of goods sold, that gets subtracted on our income statement. So we're going to use that. Administrative expenses, those will be included. Prepaid insurance, that's an asset, so no. Selling expenses will be. Accounts payable, that's a liability, so no. Interest expense will be. Common stock is an equity account, so no. And then we've got loss, which will be. Retained earnings will not be. Retained earnings as a balance sheet account. All right, so now what I've eliminated some things. So now what I'm going to do is start putting together my income statement. All right, so all financial statements have their designated heading, right? So, it's company name, what the statement is, and the date. All right, so depending on your teacher, I typically tell them they can omit this just because, I mean, let's face it, if you can't write the heading out, then, you have bigger problems to worry about. So I typically tell the students to omit the heading just for the sake of the time, especially on a test when you're on a time crunch anyway. So, but anyways, it would have the proper heading. So make sure you understand what your teacher wants you to include. All right. So our first thing we always start with sales revenue. All right. So sales revenue is given as 2476. All right. We are going to net that. So less sales discounts. All right, so we'll talk about sales discounts, sales returns and allowances and all that type stuff later on. And that is 63,000. All right, so that is going to give me net sales. All right, so that's 2 million, 413. All right, from then we subtract out cost of goods sold. All right, you might see this cost of sales or something like that. I typically call it cost of goods sold and abbreviate CGS. All right, that number was given as 1,183. All right, so this is the top of your income statement, and that gives us gross profit. That's a G right there, a little bit sloppy. Sorry about that. So gross profit 1230. So that's the gross profit. So gross profit's an important number for companies because it tells me how much profit I have that now needs to cover the rest of the expenses that it takes to fund my operations, which will be the next section. So the next section will be operating expenses. And we'll list those out. All right, so let me slide this up a little bit. So, we'll kind of have to scroll back and forth. But so our operating expenses are going to be selling expenses and our administrative expenses. Now, this includes all sorts of stuff. Basically, a lot of companies will call them SG&A, selling, general, and administrative expenses, and that pretty much includes all the expenses of the company, from salaries and wages to utilities to depreciation to insurance on buildings, anything like that. All right, so selling expenses were 233,000. And administrative expenses were 155. All right, so the total of that is 388. All right, and so we'll net that, and that's going to give us income from operations. So I'll abbreviate it like that, and that's 842,000. All right, another thing you can be doing as you do this, and maybe I should have started with this, is as you use items up, just check them off. Sales revenue, we used. Sales discount, 63, we used. Cost of goods sold, we used. All right, where's our selling and administrative? They're both over here, the 155 and the 233, so we use those. So that way we're kind of keeping track. So we still see we have some interest items and this loss that we need to take care of as well. So that will be our next section. All right, so we'll call this next section the other revenue and gains. All right, and then we'll have other expenses and losses. Now, some companies may just lump it all into like an other revenues and expenses, or just lump them all in together. We'll just separate them out for now. That's fine. All right, so we have interest revenue. It's our only other revenue. There were no gains, so we just have one interest revenue, and that's 97,000. All right, so that's has a subtotal there of 939,000. So that got added because it was a revenue. All right, and then we're going to have other expenses and losses as our next section. All right, let me scroll down a little bit here. All right, so other expenses and losses, we had interest expense, and that was, if you look back up there, 74,000. And then we had the loss on sale of equipment, and that was given as 45,000. All right, so we have an expense and a loss, 74 and 45, so that works out to be 119. All right, so that is going to give me income before income tax. All right, and that works out to be 820. All right, the next step is to take our income tax out. All right, so remember, it says the income tax was 30%. All right, so 30% of that is 246,000. All right, so 30%, I'll just write it here. So that's 30% of the 820,000. All right, so that's what we're paying tax on. So that's 246. All right, and then that's going to give us, that's going to give us net income. All right, and that works out to be 574,000. All right, now remember, net income, if we had discontinued operations or anything else that would happen below here, we would have called this line right here income from continuing operations, and then taken out our discontinued operations and then had net income. But since in this problem there were no discontinued operations, we did not need to do that. So that's our final line. That would be net income. Now look, underneath here we would have earnings per share information, but this problem did not give us the number of shares outstanding, so we really can't calculate that, and that's fine. Right? So when you're doing these problems, once again, have a good grasp of the sections of the income statement, especially, a lot of students get lost down here in the other section. All right, so make sure you break these items out as the other revenues and gains, other expenses, losses, and really, pay attention to how your teacher wants that presented, how your teacher teaches it in class. Another thing is make sure you can identify what's included and what's not included, because it's very easy to take points off if you throw cash or accounts receivable or something into the income statement where it does not belong. All right, so pay attention to those little things. Another way these problems can be presented is to give you a trial balance. All right, so a trial balance would have all the assets, liabilities, equity counts, and then all the revenues and expenses, and you could do an income statement from that, or even a balance sheet from that, or even a combination of the two. So just kind of, when you're doing your homework and the way your teacher teaches it in class and gives examples, make sure you really pay close attention to that, because that's a good indicator of what's going to be expected of you on the test. All right, so this concludes our income statement section. So make sure you go back and have a good grasp of all the videos here on the income statement before moving forward. And our next section will be on the balance sheet. And then we'll start moving into separate individual accounts and how to account for special items that might arise with each of those. So hopefully you enjoyed this. Please subscribe to my channel, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.